Sam, we are virtually blind. All of us. You tell me that my eyes are perfect. Well, they're not. I'm blind to all but 1/10 of the universe.
My dear friend, only the gods see everything.
My dear doctor, I'm closing in on the gods.
Hello, and welcome to Every Single Sci-Fi Film Ever. I'm Aisha Khan. Today we'll be talking about the 1963 film X, the Man with the X-Ray Eyes, which stars Ray Milland and was directed by Roger Corman. Before we get to my wonderful guests, I just wanted to quickly mention a few of the big hits from 1962, just to give you a little context of what was happening. So the biggest grossing film of 1962 was The Longest Day, which was a war film. Also in the top 10, Lawrence of Arabia, A Touch of Mink, and To Kill a Mockingbird. 1962 was also the year that Dr. No was released, which was the first film of the James Bond series. It was sadly also the year that Marilyn Monroe passed away. Now on to my amazing guests. First up is Barry Keith Grant, who's Professor Emeritus of Film Studies at Brock University, Canada. He has written/edited numerous books, articles, and essays on science fiction cinema. Welcome back to the show, Barry. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here again and talk with you.
Wonderful. Joining Barry is John Wills, who's Professor of American Media and Culture at the University of Kent. He has written lots about popular culture, including America and nuclear film. Welcome back to the show, John. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Nice to see you again.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, Barry, I love going to people who have seen these films in their original settings in the original time. So I am going to go to you because this, I believe, blew your, 15-year-old mind or something similar?
By my calculation, I saw X, the Man with the X-Ray Eyes, either in late 1963 when the film came out. I think it came out in the summer of 63. Or early 1964, depending on how long it took for the film to trickle down to the local cinemas in the Bronx, in my neighborhood. But I do remember I saw the film with my posse of 15-year-old friends, and it was on a double feature with Dementia 13, which is the first film directed by Francis Coppola. I think my response was the same as that of my friends. Dementia 13, we kind of dismissed pretty quickly because it was very, very moody, kind of gothic exercise in ambiance, which I didn't really appreciate enough at the time, I guess. And there was no real payoff to that film. Whereas with X, the Man with the X-Ray Eyes, you get that final shot at the end, which I'll wait till, we'll talk about that later. But even if that shot is very quick and has questionable special effect, nevertheless, it was a powerful moment at the time. And for a 14 or 15-year-old boy, it really was a film that made me think about philosophical and religious issues.
And the other thing is, it feels very much like we are now in the 60s. It's 1963, and it's let go of a lot of those older kind of 1950s tropes. And it begins with, I found this really shocking, actually. It begins with an eyeball. Just an eyeball, a full eyeball. And then the eyeball is floating in a jar, which, were you shocked at that when you were 15?
I was, for a couple of reasons. That opening shot, it lasts on the screen for almost a minute. And it's like an avant-garde gesture. It could be out of a Michael Snow film. It's just there on the screen, and you find yourself contemplating it, and of course, it reflects back on the eye as the site of vision and the importance of cinema in relation to vision. So it gets you thinking in a kind of self-reflexive way, even though I couldn't have articulated that back in 1963. And then that shot is followed by a second shot in which we see the eyeball in the jar from a further distance attached to the optic nerve, and there's kind of bloody tissue there, which gives us a real kind of visceral feeling. And I also had in mind, I have to say, a film that I saw probably a couple of years earlier, Horrors of the Black Museum, which opens with no narrative context, a woman receiving a package in the mail, which she opens, and it's a pair of binoculars, and she goes to look at them, and two spikes come out of the eyepieces and puncture her eyes. And that was a powerful moment for me because there was no narrative explanation. I mean, there is later, but not at that time in the film. It's just this moment of attack on the eyeball.
Yeah, and that is a terrifying thing.
I found very disturbing. Yeah.
John, you mentioned that there was a lot when you were watching it. There was a lot of language around sight and eyes and stuff like that.
I do like that sequence a lot with the eyeball in the jar, and it kind of sets it up that you have an element of medicine and science and research, but you also have that horror element, and they're being kind of combined and represented within the bottle. But yeah, for me, the film is great fun. But it's also quite neat at times. And one of the things I noticed was how there's lots of subtle little nods to eyes, vision, seeing throughout the whole movie. With the script, often the script makes little jokes around Xavier, the main character's, seeing or not seeing, right to the get-go, which we can talk more about. He explains his scientific research in terms of how we're virtually blind, all of us. But he also, throughout the movie, will make casual quips about eyes and seeing. So in one scene whereby he's trying to escape a hustler who kind of attempts to almost like own him, he says, "Get out of my sight," as the last thing, even though he can't see the hustler at the time. There's always this kind of playfulness. And I was also reflecting on it earlier today, and we noticed how even visually it's very rich around seeing or not seeing things. But I noticed how his glasses kind of grow in terms of the scale of his problem and the scale of what he sees. And so by the end of the movie, his glasses are pretty serious. They are very thick, big glasses. So there's just like those playful things around eyes and seeing made this part of the joy of watching this movie, definitely.
Yeah, and it's quite fascinating because he does say that I'm virtually blind because I can only see 10% of the spectrum. For someone with an unscientific brain like mine, it just feels like you'd see more colours. It's interesting how it goes way beyond that in a really horrific way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, for him, it's not about just colours. It's about, doesn't he say something like the mysteries of creation, that somehow by seeing that extra percentage, and it is a significant percentage, but we're going to see the meaning of life, and we'll see what no man has ever seen, almost like seen before. It's almost like some sort of Star Trek New Frontier, isn't it? That he's going to open our world, and in a way the film tries to do that a little bit, doesn't it? It tempts us by showing looking through his eyes at things anew. But yeah, it's quite a scale up from what you'd medically expect, isn't it?
Yeah.
from this process.
For a sci-fi film, and obviously science fiction films have lots to do with science and the body and biology and going back to Frankenstein, which we'll also talk about. But there's a lot of stuff about the body in the film. Like, that's why he's, now he can see, now he can help people identify their problems, like bodily problems and stuff.
Part of the attraction of it is that we're looking quite closely at eyes and the body, and it brings the medical element to the fore, doesn't it? We have the surgery, we have seeing inside other people's bodies, we have it in a serious way, but we also have it, which again we'll talk about later, in a very more kind of jokey way, an adult way about seeing people's flesh. It's constantly there, and that's also talking about, I think it's playing upon that idea of scientists becoming the mad scientist and making Frankenstein and making doing things horrific with bodies. It tackles some of our queasiness, doesn't it, around bodies too, that it's, right from the start, we're meant to feel kind of queasy about the human body. We're looking at bodies, but we're also having a narrative about how we're getting close to the gods at the same time, that something's far bigger than this, that this is something monumental and magical. But most of the film, we're looking at eyes.
Barry, why do you
Yeah.
think this mad scientist trope, and you said that you had potential philosophies around religion, this idea of closing in on the gods is such a long-lasting theme in science fiction?
Well, it seems to me that always the goal of science is to learn more, to see more, to know more. This is what the human race is about, gaining knowledge. So that virtually every scientist in a horror film becomes a mad scientist because they try, they try to learn more, but the moral tends to be there are places that man is not meant to go. There are things we should not see. And I guess the mysteries of the universe are among those things that we're not supposed to see, because Dr. Xavier gets to the point where he can't not see anymore. And he can only see that which the average person cannot see now. He can't even control the depth of his vision.
And I think that's what the sunglasses is supposed to show. I think that they're getting more and more heavily lined with lead so that he can try and contain.
That's why his glasses are getting bigger.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but I think that this particular mad scientist, and he says at one point, "You think I'm mad, right?" So he even consciously invokes that tradition. But I think that his version of the mad scientist takes on a little bit of extra meaning when you think about what was going on with science and the body in the late 1950s and early 1960s. There are things like kidney transplants. The first one happened, I think, in 1960. But the one breakthrough I think that is of particular importance is discovering the double helix.
Yeah.
That was back in 1953, but that raises all kinds of issues about genetic manipulation and improving the body and making changes to the body as possibilities. It's like, the DuPont company's tag phrase in the 1950s was "better living through chemistry," promising all of these things that people were embracing before we realized the downside of pollution and so on.
One of the adverts for Pacific Gas and Electric at the time talks of a second gold rush of uranium. And so embracing the atom and embracing nuclear science as this way of progressing society and humanity is still around, I think, at that time before it starts to fracture in the 60s, really. And I think it captures some of those those motifs of science healing us all, and we get it in the scenes of the movie whereby Xavier sees people's injuries in hospital, doesn't he? And in a way, you get a sense where actually this mad scientist, there's something to this. He is showing, the real power of what he's doing. I definitely connect with that idea of it capturing some element of scientific optimism or utopianism there. But it's also done through a kind of populist lens, isn't it, or popular appeal of science, because it's actually one of the adverts for the time I looked up. The poster for the movie said he had the power to see through clothes, flesh, and walls. And that's more the science we want, isn't it? That's the, we don't want the high level kind of genetic breakthroughs. We want to see through clothes and walls. So yeah,
well, I don't, but whatever you say, John.
That's right. I've got myself in trouble already. And he's not the best scientist, is he? I mean, he's a hilarious example, isn't he, of the mad scientist, because he's so obsessed with seeing more. He's really obsessed with those eye drops. I mean, I read the warnings not to take eye drops too many times. He's jumped from this is a serious scientific experiment to taking about 10 eye drops within
just give me the eye drops, man.
Yeah, give them to me. So it's really funny. I like that.
John, he even says at one point that the effect of the drops is cumulative. So one has to wonder why he keeps putting more into his head.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't seem, the wisest, of course, does he? But we also know from viewing it, this is exactly what's going to happen, isn't it? Right from the get-go, he's going to keep doing it.
Yeah, you could tell he was off kilter even before that man fell out the window. But yeah, when you're talking about science, LSD is also one of those things that was discovered like in the late 30s, and then in 40s it started being applied. In the 50s it was used, as a beneficial drug by psychiatrists and psychologists. So Gary Grant was on it. It was very kind of supposed to help people through their trauma, and then it became a kind of a recreational drug and a street drug, and then all the kind of fear stories. And it's almost like the film itself matches that kind of trajectory where it kind of, it's in the interests of science, and then it kind of, they have a bit of fun, they have some crazy nude 60s party, and then like things start going off the rails. It's an interesting kind of alignment with that, I think.
The LSD aspect of the film, 1963, I think, is the year that Timothy Leary was fired from Harvard because of his experiments with LSD. But there was also 1963 is in that short time period between the time that people became aware of LSD and its potential negative effects, and when it became illegal, because it wasn't illegal at that time.
Until 1968, I think, is
something like
illegal.
that.
Yeah, let's talk a bit more about his trajectory. So he goes from being a very obsessive scientist, and he then accidentally kills someone or pushes them out of the window. And that almost feels like up until then, it feels like quite a fun and light-hearted film. And then it just becomes darker and, well, not in colours, but darker and darker in terms of his turmoil on what he wants to achieve and where he's going with this.
Yeah, I agree. He descends really effectively through the movie, doesn't he? And the movie can feel like those two halves, whereby it's about medicine, it's about hospitals, it's about science. And then when he kind of knocks his friend out of the window, or what seems to be a blow-up doll or mannequin out of the window, then we have like this sense of, it changes, doesn't it? It changes vibe, it changes location. And that seems to show the escalation of risk. So we then move to amusement parks, Vegas, risky highways. These are all realms whereby they're associated with far more ideas of recklessness, risk, danger, like two halves. So I actually quite like that split in the movie. I think it makes it more interesting to watch.
I think the film is very canny in the way it plays with mood. And we get that scene at the party where he's looking through everybody's clothes, which is the comic point of the film. And then things start to spiral after that. So, first we get this scene where we kind of relax and chuckle a bit at the innuendo. And then after that comes the scene that John was talking about and what follows.
It's interesting because Xavier is obviously the core of the story, and we just follow him around. And then you have someone who, John, I'll let you talk a bit about Diana and her kind of strange personality, where she goes from being a very serious scientist to throwing it all away in a really short amount of time.
Yeah, it's quite shocking, isn't it? I mean, you have this interesting initial romance over a shared machine coffee, which is probably not the best beginning for any romance. And you also have, this very professional power relationship whereby Diana, seems to be highly professional and a very successful scientist. And in a way, her role is far is above Xavier. But then quickly, she seems to just automatically fall for him, start obsessing over him, saving him, from peril. And then very abruptly, Xavier just leaves her in Vegas after they go to Vegas to together, and have some very strange kind of scenes where he's making money at Vegas, but at the same time almost admitting that he's doing wrong. She's just left by the side, and it's awkward in a way because this is a woman who's kind of thrown everything away, just for some element of almost like idle admiration or blind love. And in a sense, the film showing a woman who's actually very empowered at the beginning, become very disempowered and just thrown away partway through the movie. So yeah, I just found that, and it's also a warning for all of us to be very careful around ideas of love. It can go very wrong.
She watched too many romantic films as a child. Probably she just she fell hard.
As John was talking, I'm trying to think of any Roger Corman films with strong female characters other than Bloody Mama with Shelley Winters.
Wasp Woman is.
Oh, well, that's an interesting film. And you've talked about that on your podcast. Because one can read that one as a film about the feminine in a patriarchal culture. Very much like The Substance in that way.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so why has this film, Barry, we'll go to you first. Why has this film suddenly become so kind of crazy and lacking in kind of Hays Code direction in 1963? Obviously there's a cultural element, as we said, like there's a big counterculture movement, there's lots of things changing, traditional roles are being questioned, but what's going on? Can you mention a bit of the kind of heritage of films like these?
Films like this. There aren't that many.
Similar to this.
You can see, for example, if you look at the film in terms of genre, not just does it have its influence of science fiction and horror, but there's also, I think, the influence of these young intern type movies from the late 50s, early 60s in that party scene where they're making drinks with the transfusion equipment. That comes right out of like The Young Doctors or one of those films. But I think even more relevant is the film's influenced by what were called the Nudie Cuties at the time. And, there was a whole cycle of films and Hollywood was trying to meet the challenge of the Hays Code running into conflict with much more explicit sexual content in European films, which were now coming into the American market more. And American films tried to find ways to address that. And one of the solutions that independent filmmakers came up with was what came to be called Nudie Cuties, filmed with a little bit of, never full frontal, but you could show bums and you can show breasts. That was about it. The film that was most well known was The Immoral Mr. Tease, which was released in 1959 and was the first film by Russ Meyer, who became even more prominent in as the 60s went on. But The Immoral Mr. Tease gains the ability, or at least in fantasy, to see women, to see people without their clothes on, and he focuses on women. So we get a lot of scenes with nude women and positioned in such a way that we don't see any pubic hair or anything like that. But this is basically, and it almost toward the end leaves the narrative behind and just shows these three women that Mr. Tease is watching in the woods, supposedly in bathing suits, but we see them without their clothes. And that film was an enormous commercial success. And I think Roger Corman picked up on that. I mean, he would pick up on the psychedelic aspect later with The Trip, but in '67. But at this point, I think he saw an opening with these kind of nudie cutie films and was testing the Hays Code.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the Hays Code is very much on its last legs, and it's going to disappear very soon, and a rating system
very soon. Yeah, the rating system would come in about 5 years after.
Roger Corman's first idea was of a musician on drugs. So, Xavier plays the saxophone, and he was going to have a guy going off on drugs and doing it. And apparently in his book, he claims, the book that he wrote, How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime from 1990, he claimed because of his scientific background, he decided he would go with the scientist. And I do have an interesting quote from Corman, which I'll actually say now. So it says, from Corman, from his book, later I realized it was the concept that was important, a researcher moving through science towards a religious mystical experience. The theme of X-ray eyes was rather similar to the 2001 A Space Odyssey, made 5 or 6 years later, in that in the end of the Odyssey, a hallucinogenic mystical vision of light and motion. Kubrick's trip was through space, X's was interior. Now, the production time on these two films could not be more opposite because 2001 took around 5 years to make, and this apparently the shooting schedule was a few weeks to a few months to get some extra footage. But it's an interesting parallel he draws there. Thoughts on that, John?
Gosh, I'm stuck on what to say. I mean, aren't they the same film? And they're so similar, aren't they? And the budgets too. They must have been the same budget. It is quite a strange link there in terms of scale, at least. I think that it is interesting how the psychedelic element, that I like parts of the film where you're seeing it through Xavier's eyes, and there's a sense whereby you as the viewer are having, in a sense, some degree of a drugged experience, or it's as though you're taking the eye drops and you're meant to be seeing this city unboard and have the blurring effect, the multiple colours hitting. And so you're having, to some degree, that simulation or an attempt at simulation of a drug experience. And I think that, that's the power of cinema to do that. It's also interesting for me how, where do you go when you're doing some experiments with drugs where you and maybe you're having problems seeing lights, you head for Vegas. That doesn't necessarily, that seems both very appropriate and very inappropriate at the same time. That's certainly not the landscape you're going to head to kind of heal yourself at that moment. So those are a couple of comments. I also, I forgot to say over the dancing scene, I don't know whether we're going back to that, but I did just love how Ray Milland dances in the movie. I think that should be mentioned for any viewer. They should definitely.
It's definitely worth checking out.
That segment of how he dances. He does this kind of really poor version of 1960s Batman dancing, and he looks very, very awkward doing it. But somehow is very alluring to every woman in that on that dance floor. So I think anybody who does dad dancing, they will be kind of, wow, if I do dancing really badly, it will really work. But I think that the LSD kind of element is for me, I didn't initially kind of think about it until you talked about it more, because I was so kind of intrigued by what this is a kind of almost like a science experiment. And the doctor. So in that way, I wasn't thinking of it until you said. But then when I rewatched these segments where he's staring out of the car, looking at the cities, and things are all going very hazy and blurry, then it matched perfectly with what you were talking about.
In terms of the film trying to give a sense of a psychedelic experience, we get that shot of the camera like going through back of Xavier's head into his skull, as if to say, we're being taken inside, so we're going to have this subjective experience now. And at one point, there's a shot, his eye point of view shot, where his eye is blinking after the drop. We
blinking,
see his eye blink, so like we are inside his head. And the other thing I wanted to say was in relation to the dance scene. I really want to know more about the woman who tried to pick him up. I think she was a really interesting character. She's very outspoken and independent for 1963, but she just is there for a second and then disappears.
And doesn't Xavier say you have sharp eyes to her? So he pays her a kind of eye quip as well to kind of praise her. But yeah, it is so funny, isn't it? Because she turns up, flirts, and then just disappears. But she's given some sense of prominence, isn't she? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also funny because it is in that traditional kind of what they make fun of in Austin Powers, that everything is well placed. So you, as you say, you can't ever have proper full frontal nudity. It has to be like people are shimmying down, but then they can't quite get up because that would involve seeing too much by the audience.
The framing, we either see their from the shoulders up or from the knees down.
And that's a relief. That's where Xavier is looking as well. If we're looking through his eyes, we know that he's behaving with his male gaze.
But Barry, you don't think that? I mean, the special effects are not quite the same as 2001, are they?
No. I mean, everything that I might say about it, of course, has to be qualified by the fact that it is 1963 and there's no digital special effects yet. So it's all analog. And in that sense, he did a good job. But the solarization shots with the color, a little bit on the cheesy side. But the thing that I think it really fails is the shots when Xavier is looking inside people's bodies as a doctor. And what we see are drawings. They're very unconvincing, except for some reason, which I have no idea about. There's one shot where he shows actual intestines. It's very quick. It lasts for just a second. And to me, that was anticipating George Romero in Night of the Living Dead with the intestines. And that was a startling shot, but it's the only one like that in the film.
Very interesting. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy this film, despite all the kind of tongue-in-cheek comments I've made about 2001, which is, they're very different films, and I really enjoy the special effects as well. Let's talk a little bit about the place of religion in this film, because he goes to this carnival and he becomes this kind of like oracle or soothsayer with his, he's got a strap in front of his eyes with a third eye drawn on. And it's quite interesting because as we head into the 60s, later in the 60s, there are going to be a lot more kind of gurus and some kind of crazy cults, and two separate things, obviously. But it's almost interesting that this is 63, those things tending to happen more in the late 60s, but it's another way in which this film kind of encapsulates the kind of 60s culture that's developing.
That's certainly true. In the 60s, as the 60s went on, the drug culture, in part, was a search by people for expanded consciousness. And I think later that kind of evolved into people trying to have some kind of transcendental experience or epiphany without the drugs, and they turned to gurus and spiritual leaders. Probably the most famous would be the Beatles going with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in 1968. But that Hare Krishna movement was founded in 1966, I think.
I found that really interesting, and also a big reason for the influx of people coming in from, South Asia and other places is that the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 opened up immigration to countries that previously were not permitted to kind of come to the US. So Amrit Desai actually came in, who is one of the founders of yoga in the US came in 1960, but he was a student and then he began teaching. But most of the others did come in 65 and later because of that act. So I just wanted to mention that. But his demeanor when he's at the carnival and similarly in Vegas, he doesn't have any kind of, he's so grumpy again and so like truthful about everything. Like he doesn't try and hide the fact that he can see.
Right. We can see through him.
Yeah. He doesn't try and manage the fact that being able to see through things is going to get him into trouble.
This is your trick, ain't it?
I have no trick.
You gotta. Everybody does. It's in the mask.
Can you see through it?
No. There's a switch or something.
No switch.
Then how?
Why do you think they don't just try and give him a bit more of a kind of a subtle edge to all of that?
Oh, that's a good question. I agree completely. He's not the best charismatic court leader, is he? Because he's not really manipulating others. Maybe he manipulates, Diana a little bit, but he's not. That's not his modus operandi. He's in a sense trying to just state things as he sees it, and he's very gruff and blunt. It's almost as though we're meant to think of him as his pursuit is so binary and pure and self-obsessed. He doesn't have any room for platitudes. He doesn't have any room for being nice to people who care for him. That he's just so focused, isn't he? He's completely keyed into that one mission of seeing, isn't it? And I think maybe it's maybe that gives a reason partly why he is not more clever or careful with what he does in the film. This blind pursuit, isn't it? It's blind passion that he has that we all kind of need to take in by the viewer needs to focus on that.
Well, I'm wondering if maybe I'm giving the film too much credit, but perhaps we can read his behavior that, as John says, seems inexplicable as symptomatic of his growing madness, because he's seeing too much and he's just losing contact with the subtleties for how you deal with everyday situations.
Yeah, because he's got the blindfold in a way, hasn't he? He's got that disconnect between himself and others. Okay, on some levels he can see through them, but he can't connect with them. He can't properly see them, in a sense, isn't it? Within the film, most
it's
of the
his
time
blind
he loses
spot.
that connection. Yeah, his blind spot, I should say.
Barry, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about the sound design and a man called Les Baxter.
Les Baxter was a composer and arranger, and he did a fair number of studio albums, but he also scored films, and he did a number for Roger Corman, a number of films for Roger Corman. And in fact, he's credited with starting this whole movement, musical movement called Exotica, which probably the most well-known example is Quiet Village by Martin Denny, if you know that tune. But the thing that struck me about this film was the ambiguity of when something happens with his vision and he's seeing something or he's having some kind of, pardon the pun, insight. We get this music that it has a vocal aspect to it, like a chorus. I don't want to say heavenly chorus because that's putting the wrong connotation on it, but some kind of spooky chorus.
James?
Of the world,
which reminded me, in fact, of the use of the Ligeti music in 2001. Because in 2001, when they approached the monolith on the moon, you hear that chorus, and it's never clear whether that sound is emanating from from the monolith, or if it's non-diegetic music added by Kubrick. And so it creates this kind of odd this junction between the sound and the image. And I kind of felt that as I was watching this film. It just made me think of the music of 2001.
So another 2001 reference. I like that. Barry, you mentioned Stephen King. Stephen King's projected ending, which apparently wasn't that true.
I guess we could talk about the ending now. In the film, as we have it, when we hear the preacher at the revival meeting,
if thine eye offends thee, pluck it out! Pluck it out! Pluck it out!
And he goes, Xavier goes below the frame, and then his head rises, and you see two red, empty eye sockets. That only lasts for a second. It was powerful enough for me when I was
It's really
15.
shocking. Yeah.
It is shocking. But, today one would expect to see it with like blood dripping down.
With far more realistic kind of,
Yeah. But it is a shocking moment. But the so-called Stephen King ending was that he rises back up and he says, I still see. So that this vision that penetrates everything is not even an ocular vision anymore. It goes beyond that. That would be horrible. That would be completely horrible.
Yeah. And I think it would really actually suit the film. So Stephen King claimed there was a rumor that was the original ending.
Right.
And when Roger Corman heard about it, he said he denied the existence, but he expressed enjoyment with the idea, saying, now it's interesting. Stephen King saw the picture and wrote a different ending. And I thought his ending was better than mine. So thumbs up from Roger Corman for that ending, which is, I think it's quite a phenomenal. Well, Stephen King's not famous for nothing, I guess.
He's also, when he's watching movies, you probably shouldn't necessarily trust his reviews. He's being really imaginative with what he sees on film. But yeah, well, I think it's a good story. Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Anything you want to talk about the ending, John, and how we get to this kind of like religious gathering?
Yeah, I really like the ending. I think it's really strong. I actually watched it with, I'm not sure if this is a good idea, I watched it with my 10-year-old son. I also thought there was this play on the sins in it. It's all about him being a sinner, isn't it? And he's cool. He's asked whether he's a sinner. He has black eyes that are quite devilish. And he's also through the film moved through a range of sins, hasn't he? He's after starting out a doctor, who's the epitome of the healer. He actually ends up a murderer, a con man, a gambler. He's kind of he's working through classic kind of religious sins, and then he comes up against this priest who makes kind of the declaration about if thy eye offends thee. So I thought it was really neat and quite a powerful ending to the movie. Definitely.
Yeah, it is interesting because I don't think he murders that guy, but I think he was definitely involved in it in some way.
Yeah, it's homicide, or it's accidental, isn't it?
Yeah.
He didn't mean to get rid of his friend.
No. Yeah, it's a shame they don't have some kind of buffet in Vegas, because maybe he could go through all 7 of the sins while he was there. But yeah,
that's right.
There was the option that at that point he could have had some kind of salvation, but they chose to go with the punishment. What are your thoughts on that, Barry?
I think that's the conventional generic ending for the mad scientist. I don't think there was any other possible way to end the film. Really, he's seen more than humans have seen before, more than we should see, because he's looking at the secrets of the universe now, which we're not meant to know, at least not yet, and he has to pay the price for his hubris.
Interesting. Okay, can we talk about the legacy of this film? Barry, first.
Just as it's on the cusp between the 50s and the 60s, it's a kind of transitional film for Corman, and I think for science fiction generally, because it has the special effects that we talked about. It has the mad scientist story. But unlike most of Corman's previous films, or indeed most previous monster movies, or many of them, the focus is more on the characters, I think. And I think that that's one of the reasons why Ray Milland was cast in this film, because he brings a kind of old Hollywood atmosphere, and he's also, I mean, he brings a gravitas and a really good sense of acting to the film.
Yeah, and he's an Oscar winner as well.
He is for the Lost Weekend, and a way in a way to demonstrate this transitional aspect of the film, he went on to make a couple of other horror films, because he, as the 60s went on, he became an older actor and wasn't the kind of leading man that he had been earlier. But then he was in films like Frogs. I don't think we should finish talking about this film without mentioning Don Rickles' performance.
Oh, of course.
Also, because I think he's great. His performance.
So he kind of his name's Crane, and he becomes I guess a semi-manager of Xavier when he's at the carnival. That's probably...
Exactly. He gives those kind of quips in response to the people when he's working as a barker before the show, which seems to me was probably ad-libbed as the kind of thing he did in his stage performances. But at the same time, once we get to see him a little more, he has this kind of really ominous edge to his performance that is very unsettling, and I think his performance is really good in this film.
It is.
To me, it becomes more of a character-driven film, which became, I think, a trend a little bit in the 60s in science fiction, but then got displaced by science fiction action films, as time went on, and we forgot about character in science fiction for a while.
I was going to ask, do you think this is, I mean, I've not seen that many Roger Corman films, and he did make a lot, but do you think it's one of his best, if not his best?
I think it's his best film. I like a lot of the other films. I think Wasp Woman is a film that you can, as we said, you can read a lot into. I'm not sure that how deliberate it was, although that's really a different issue. That's a very interesting film. And there are other films like Attack of the Crab Monsters that has some interest to it. And I like the Poe films. They're very interesting, and they explore the psychology of the characters to some extent. But I think this film is probably the most thoughtful of thought-provoking of Corman's film.
Okay, John.
I've got a couple of answers to this. One is that I was looking for a review of it at the time. I looked at the New York Times review, and the reviewer said how it was far better than Dementia 13. So it was better than Francis Ford Coppola's kind of work. So
my 15-year-old friends knew a lot.
Yeah, there you go. It is. The one was called the Coppola movie was called All But Berries, a fairly workable plot. Whereas the movie we're talking about, the reviewer said the concept is original and the tone is thoughtful. They like the spooky music that we've talked about. And they I don't know whether this is good or bad, they called it an odd little movie. But I think that, for me, I really enjoyed it. I think that it's got a lot of richness there. I think we've highlighted how it sits at the beginning of the 1960s. And I think that's one of the significances, I guess, of the movie, is that it kind of captures lots of those things that start emerging during that decade, both in popular culture and in filmmaking. And there's just a lot of richness to it. I really enjoyed how one minute you've got a little bit of body horror, the next you've got, kind of medicine and science fiction and experimentation. Then you've got psychedelia. Then you've got humor. You've got a very kind of poor attempt at a car chase. You've got mystery. But there's lots to this film, and it's only about an hour and 15 or an hour and 20.
Right.
It never feels to me slow. It's always moving. There's always motion to it, trajectory to it. I think if I was given the opportunity, which I prefer to watch for fun, between 2001 and X, then I probably, if I'm short for time, I know which I go for. But it's good. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, you have to kind of lock in for 2001. You have to dedicate an afternoon or an evening to it fully. You can't just dip in and out.
No.
It's interesting because in 1967, he does actually make The Trip, which is written by Jack Nicholson, which you mentioned, Barry. And so I watched that as well. But this film is far more engaging, and they are both about trips. And I understand that The Trip was actually far, far more successful. So in 1967, LSD still has not been made illegal, and there is a huge counterculture kind of environment where people are going to watch this film because it's called The Trip. And similarly with the Space Odyssey, because of the Stargate sequence, apparently that's one of the reasons why it ended up becoming extremely popular, and they changed the advertising for the film. So there is that kind of counterculture movement, but this film is just so much more enjoyable than The Trip.
It is. That's because Peter Fonda is in The Trip.
Could you please, I will go to John this time first. Could you please give a recommendation for the listeners, John?
Because this film had kind of very 1960s vibe, it's very psychedelic, there was little bits of body horror. For some reason, I kept thinking of Wizard of Gore by Herschel Gordon Lewis, which is a bit later, is it like about 1970, something like that? But it's a psychedelic body horror movie about Montague the magician, and the Montague performs special magic tricks in front of a live audience. And it's very wacky, very shocking, and but there's also something charming about it. And for some reason, I thought, I want to watch that again after watching the Roger Corman movie.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Barry.
I came up with Robert Heinlein's *Stranger in a Strange Land*, which is from published in 1961, and the reason I did was because that novel is about a human who's raised on Mars and then comes to Earth, and he's kind of he's rejected and he's treated like a guru. So it touches on that aspect of the 60s of spiritual searching. There's also a scene where he tries to, or a chapter where he tries to hide from public view by going to a carnival and using his own special powers in the carnival. And the other thing about *Stranger in a Strange Land* is that it itself became a cult novel of the 60s. And, it was everybody in the counterculture was reading it, and terms from the novel like grokking water, entered public discourse. So to me, that novel is touching on some similar issues to the film.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.
Our pleasure.
Great. That's it for this episode. I'm not quite sure what I'll be discussing next episode, so please have a look at the show notes to find out which film you need to watch to catch up. Aside from that, if you would like to support the podcast, please do. This is an independent podcast. There is no production team. It is just me who is producing, booking, editing, researching, everything. So if you can, leave a wonderful rating or review in your favourite podcasting app. It is greatly appreciated. And if you want to support the podcast financially, you can do so by going to my Patreon channel, which is patreon.com/every sci-fi film. There, for just $3 or £3 a month, you can get ad-free versions of the podcast. Exciting. I wanted to give a huge thank you to my Patreon subscribers and to all of those people who are supporting and listening to the show. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.